Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Manitoba Agriculture Crop Talk webinar series. If you have any questions during this presentation today, please type them into the questions section of the GoToWebinar menu, and we will answer them at the end of the presentation. This webinar is being recorded, and you will receive a link to the recording. We're having a few technical difficulties this morning with Lionel's audio, so we are going to push through and start off with Dennis Lang, who's a crop specialist in Pulse, and he's prepared a presentation on pea and soybean crops, varieties, seeding, fertilizing, and more. So Dennis, I'll give you the screen.
Alrighty, so we're just going to go in full slideshow mode here, and
there you go. It looks fantastic. Go ahead.
Wonderful, wonderful. Yes. So Lionel's given me the chair here this morning. So thanks, Lionel, for that, and we'll get rolling right into it. So I thought today what I would do is talk about a few of the quick updates, I guess, on some of the things growers should be concerned about or thinking about this spring. Going to our next slide here. And what we're going to be talking here or covering today, a little bit about soybean peels this past year in Manitoba, variety testing in the province as well, where that's happening. Talk about high soil nitrogen levels and for both peas and soybeans and how to manage that. Some of the residue issues to watch out for in peas, because that was a concern last year. And I'll mention some of the products that growers need to be aware of moving into this growing season. Also going to launch the seeding rate calculator as well here. Hopefully that's going to work well here. It's a new link on our website, and also talking about soybean cyst nematode, a little bit about soybean regrowth, and a little bit about soybean conventional soybeans as well. So let's move right into it here. So we'll just click into it here and back up one here. There we go. So for 2021, just to kind of give a quick roundabout review, soybeans in Manitoba, we had just about 1.1 million, almost 1.2 if you add in the pedigree production this last year. Our provincial average was 28 bushels an acre, so that's down from previous years. We're actually sitting, our 10-year average is sitting in that 35 range per bushel range. So we are definitely lower last year with how dry things were. What is interesting, again, when you look at the percent of, I'm just going to get a pointer here and pointer options. And so when you're looking here at the percent of acres in the province, if you look at the western side of the province, west, northwest, Interlake, so basically everything west of Morden, west of Portage, upwards toward and then north of Stonewall up to Arborg, that would be about 47% of our acres. The central and eastern areas would include about 53%. So those numbers have kind of bouncing around a little bit. When we first started growing soybeans, we only had 5% in the west, and then as things kind of moved along, we got varieties that are more suited for that production, for those production areas. The acres balanced out to about 3 years ago. I think we had more acres in the west than we did in the east, but now we're kind of balancing between that, just on either side of 50%. Field pea acres yields were also down this year as well. Provincial average was 36 bushels per acre. All these numbers are according to the harvest production report that Crop Insurance puts out. You can find that information in Yield Manitoba. We had about 201,000 acres harvested, about 210,000 acres planted. We were looking at dry beans, just for interest's sake. Dry bean acres were similar to what they were in previous years, or the previous year, down a bit, but yields were definitely down. Our provincial average is like 1,700 pounds, and we only ended up with around just under 1,300 this past year. So moving in, I'm going to talk about field pea locations and where they're tested within the province. For those of you who are, you can find this information in Seed Manitoba, the yields from this past year and long-term yields. But you can see here where we set up our sites. We have sites in the northwest area in Roblin and Swan River, in Hamiota, Souris, down by Melita here as well. Moving towards the east, we have Carberry, we have Holland and Portage. and down near Morden as well. And we also have a site up in Arberg there as well. So just to kind of give you some numbers here, our this last year, 36 bushels per acre was our yield, as I said earlier, and our 5-year provincial average is about 50 bushels per acre. So, so provincially, yields were quite good. Interesting point here, we'll get into the trial information here in a second here. Having some difficulty advance. There we go. There we go. Okay. One of the things I'd kind of like to point out when you're looking at data from Seed Manitoba, I've talked about this in other presentations. When you're looking at the individual site year data, always look at you know, the CV and LSD. The CV, coefficient of variance, tells you how good a trial it was. The higher the CV, the more variation there was within the trial. And once we try to publish anything under 15%, that's kind of our cutoff point. We have a site here, Carberry was a little bit higher. They had a few weed challenges, so a little bit more variability there. And Hamiota was quite good at 6.7. You can see here where the CVs are in each location. So overall, we only lost one site last year. We lost Arberg, and there was just too much variation in the trial and too dry. The other thing to kind of keep in mind when you're looking at LSD, that's the least significant difference. What this number means is when you're looking at the data, if you're comparing two different varieties, in order for them to become or can be considered statistically different, they have to differ by at least 13%. So for example, and we can use the Czech variety here, Amarillo, but you can use any two varieties in this example. So let's just say, for example, we'll use Ryder here as a green pea. Well, that's your 100% here in Hamiota. So a variety that is 116% is statistically higher. But if you look at Delicious, which is only 97% of Ryder, then those two varieties statistically are considered to be equal. So that's how you kind of use these tables. You go across and use the LC for each site, and that's how you can tell which varieties did well and which varieties didn't. Next, I kind of like to roll into you know, some of the issues we've had this past year. There have been reports of high nitrogen levels in soil tests. Some of the reasons for those high nitrogen levels: less crop uptake and removal. Some crops terminated early and then reseeded but did not germinate. And there was a lot fewer losses to leaching and devenitrification based on the dry year. So we did write John Hurd and I put together a fact sheet you can find at this website here. It kind of goes into this a little bit more detail about you know, some of the things to really look at for this year, but just kind of the quick points here. So one of the things that we're kind of looking for, whether this be in peas or in soybeans, if you're 50 pounds of nitrogen residual, you know, follow your typical program. No real changes as far as whether or not you grow peas or soybeans on that piece of ground. If you're looking at 100 pounds of nitrogen or more, you may want to look at a crop that's going to make better use of that nitrogen than a pulse or a soybean. For those of you who are in the dry bean regions, dry beans would be a good choice on this piece of ground instead of going with peas. Or canola, if you're out west, would be maybe a better choice on that piece of ground, as long as it doesn't affect your long-term rotation. If you are in that 50 to 100 pound range, what we're kind of recommending is a liquid on-seed inoculant and an in-furrow granular inoculant. And the reason for this is the granular inoculant is available later in the season. So, and the liquid on-seed is only available at seeding time. So it helps spread your risk around a little bit. So if you're in that range, this is the best combination, whether you're in the soybean or a pea crop. If, however, you know, your nitrogen level is 100 pounds, what would you expect to see? So in peas, you'd probably, and soybeans, you'd probably see reduced nodulation. But in the case of field peas, you'd probably still would be okay. Your yields won't reach their full expectation. But if you had peas in the rotation, and if it's a field that you know, it's well drained and very suited for pea production, you know, even if you're above 100 pounds, the yields will still be very respectable. I would still inoculate in those cases as well, because we don't know really what their soil nitrogen levels are going to be like in spring. If you had high soil nitrogen levels last fall, I would maybe also suggest maybe doing a soil test in spring to see what's left there, if that is a real number, I guess, if you want to call it that. What you'll see in soybeans, they'll still grow, they'll look nice and green. You'll see reduced nodulation. What you might see as well is you might see a bit more iron chlorosis. So you may want to grow an IDC tolerant variety in that case. It's that nitrogen can induce those symptoms as well, when we've seen this in the field. This particular picture on the left here was actually our plots in Souris this last year. This is one of the Forge P varieties, but you can really see how tall they were. One of the things about the Souris plots, and I didn't point out in the data, but when you're looking at the Czech variety, we had 136 bushels an acre at that one site on our Czech variety, and there were some varieties that were higher than that. It just seemed to capture every single rain, perfect rain all season long. I think that is probably a record looking back on field P yields in plots for us. Normally, if we get good yields, we're somewhere in that 80 to 90 pounds, sometimes even pushing close to 100. But that 136 was quite interesting to see this year. So if you're growing peas, this is one of Terry's slides. A good lodge means a good location. If you got a field that's heavy clay, poor drainage, too much, and you get too much summer rain, not a good way to launch peas off. So really be selective on where you're putting your peas. And again, of course, you're with a field that is more prone to flooding, you're a lot more susceptible to disease such as Aphanomyces and even microsporella blight as well. Another example of right field, right location. This is the same. This is my summer student from a couple years back. Same grower, same field, or not same field, but same variety of peas. The field on the left here, that was on a lighter soil, very well drained. The field on the right, more of a heavy clay. These fields are only about 3 miles apart, so the rainfall was very similar. But this field on the right here, that picture was taken at the end of July, which is way earlier than what it should be. So the field on the left pushed 80 bushels an acre. The field on the right only did 15 bushels an acre. So it really is important. Even though these fields are very close together, soil texture was much more suited on the field on the left to growing peas. So keep those things in mind when you're growing peas moving forward. Some of the residue issues, I'd like to thank Anastasia Kubanek from Roquette. She kind of summarized these. She presented this at MAC, so I thought I would use your slides in this presentation. So field pea residue issues moving into 2022, copyrighted. So here are the list of products that you need to be concerned with. So if you use these products last year on your cereal grains or any of your fields where you plan on putting peas, I would not this year because you could end up with some problems. They did see some issues last year because of how dry things were, and these restrictions are due to reduced rainfall that we've had for most of the summer. Now, flucarbazone is another group of products here that you have to be aware of as well. The restrictions here are due to reduced rainfall plus soil pH is greater than 7.5% and low organic matter, less than 2.5%. Issues here with field pea residue has been on eroded knolls. Pyrosulfitol, that's your tundra velocity. Here, those restrictions are due to high soil pH again and low organic matter. And other notes, this is kind of something for all years, not just this year's conditions. Recropping 2 years for assert, muster, command, and option. So these are the things that you, if you have any of these products you sprayed that I just mentioned last year, you would want to change your rotation on that field and not put peas on this year. The next option here, the next thing we're going to talk about here is the seeding rate calculator. Let's see if this is going to work here. There we go. Nope, not working. Hey, Lori, can you just direct me on how to disconnect my pointer here? If you're still listening.
Yeah, I'm still, so there you go. And click it again. Yep.
There we go, there we go, there we go. That's what I was kind of wondering. Hey, so I'm going to click on this, and this should take you, this is our new seeding rate calculator that that farm management people have been working on putting together. And I'd kind of like to, go through this real quick. It's available on our website. When you click on the link, it'll take you to this page. Go down to crops, scroll down to the bottom, and you'll see something here that says new seeding rate calculator. Right now, it just has an Excel spreadsheet. It'll open up, and there's my little icon here. We're gonna open that up here, and let's see where we, just give us a second here. So when it opens up here, what it'll have is you have a choice of crops that you can look at. So here it is here. We're just going to enable content here. So we're going to go into select a crop, and we're going to go down to peas here, peas, and you put the variety name in it. Anything in blue here is what you can change. So they have things like, price per bushel. They have some defaults in here, pounds per bushel. They have your seed size, which is important, seed survivability, and target plants per acre. And then at the bottom section here, they have what your seeding rate in pounds per acre is going to be. Seeding rate at 3.3 bushels an acre based on these specifications that were put in, and some costs as well. And then when you look down a little bit further, you'll see risk and sensitive analysis. So this is based on things like seed survivability. So just to give you a quick example here, so let's say, for example, instead of your 8 plants per square foot that you're targeting, let's say we're going to go up to 9. We're going to change that 9, and we're going to see that automatically, based on the seed size, changes your actual bushel per acre to 3.71. And why that's important, we've been doing a little bit of work on this with a few different projects as of late, and a lot of growers look at growing peas as, wow, we're just going to put 3 bushels an acre in and that'll be fine. But really, if you really want to target your plant population, you need to be aware of that, because if you go at, let's say, 6, and let's go 7, see what that number is here. So basically, between 7 and 8 is where you're going to be seeing kind of that 3 bushel per acre seeding rate. So again, quite reduced from where you really like to target. I like to be in that 8 to 9, just to have a few more plants. So that's just above that 3 bushels an acre range. So just something to consider. So we'll go back to the presentation here now. So there we go. Next, I want to talk a little bit about soybean cyst nematode. So I had a phone call this past summer, and the phone call went like this. Yeah, Dennis, I think we have soybean cyst nematode in the field. My first thought was, well, we've detected it in Manitoba before, but we've never really seen it on the roots, like really seen it. So I went out to this field and brought along Mario Tenuta and brought along the folks from the Pulse Growers. And when I got there, the seed salesman said, dig anywhere. And there was a strip along the edge of the field, and I'll show you a picture in a second. And I dug my first plant, and this is what I found. When you zoom in here, you can see all these little cysts on the root. This is a highly magnified version. I was quite shocked, because this was the highest we've ever seen in Manitoba. What that means is, when they did the analysis, they had between 1250 and 1700 eggs per 100 milliliters of soil, which is considered to be a low to moderate level for soybean cyst nematode. It made matters worse this year that it was so dry, and that puts added stress onto the crop. So right now we have 5 RMs that are confirmed with soybean cyst nematode. This one was in the arm of Thompson. The other ones, when they were confirmed in previous years, they did not find above ground symptoms. They just found it by sifting through the soil. This, they actually saw above ground symptoms. So the picture on the right here, the large photograph, this is the headland of the field. This is where it was most concentrated, right along the roadway. It kind of looks like IDC that really didn't go away all season, and that was the concern from the rep there in that area, is that area just, they couldn't explain it, why that SCN just kept going. So I would have dug kind of close to the car here and found that sample that I found earlier, or showed you earlier. And as we walked in, we took samples, and once we started getting into the green areas, then we could not find any cysts on the roots anymore. Picture on the top here, this is the one with yeah, this is the one here with the just a close-up of the IDC symptoms here. I'm gonna put my pointer back on here again, and try that one more time. Here we go. And the one at the bottom here, this one was taken in early September, and this is that same strip that you see right over here from the reverse angle. But you can see here that stress that the crop was under really set it back, and everything kind of grew back, but there was no pods in it. So there really wasn't anything to really work with there. So what are our next steps? Well, for those of you who have some concerns, you need to be scouting your fields in early July for yellow stunted areas and yellow patches in the field. You need to dig up those roots and examine for those immature white cysts on the roots. They're quite a bit smaller than a nodule, so they're very distinctive. If you do find cysts, if you pop them between your fingers, if they pop like a zit, it's not a young nodule, it's likely SCN, right? That's the difference between a nodule will just basically squish, and SCN will actually just pop. So if you do find those types of things, probably the first thing to do is give me a call. We can discuss about getting some field testing done. How you manage those areas, I think, is really important as well, because the cyst nematode does move on soil particles. You really want to, avoid having unnecessary equipment in that field, in that part of the field, I guess, if you have to. Try to avoid those areas and do some disinfecting before and after you move into that field. So just a few quick points on that. So got a few other things here. You can clean the soil from equipment when you're moving from fields to fields. If you have some, if you either think or you have some SCN in the field. Stretching your rotation between soybean crops and also dry bean crops, because dry bean crops provide a host here. And in Minnesota, they've actually found soybean cyst nematode that have been showing above ground symptoms on dry beans, in particular kidney beans, about 3 years ago. And so it is something that is a concern for dry bean growers up here as well. There is a list of resistant varieties, and those varieties can be found in Seed Manitoba in the variety description table. I did a quick review of what we grow in Manitoba. So of the 1 million acres that we grow in the province, we're somewhere just over 300,000 of those are soybean cyst nematode resistant. So there's still some potential there. If you don't have it, there's a bit of discussion, about whether you should be incorporating it in a soybean cyst variety into your rotation. I don't think it's a bad thing to do that. The varieties nowadays are really good as far as yield and maturity. So if you have one that also has soybean cyst nematode, I would, incorporate that into your rotation. If you can still grow some of the other varieties as well, but just incorporate that into that rotation maybe once every 4 years, and just to help slow the spread there. So this was the next interesting thing. This is something I've never actually seen before in Manitoba to this scale. So I got a call. One of my first calls actually was up in the Marquette area, and it was an early season variety, and they couldn't figure out why part of the field was grass green. And when you kind of look into the canopy, you can see some pods here. Now this is September. This is something that it should look like in July, not in September. We did that closer inspection, and then we started getting a few more calls. This happened to be my field, actually, close to Emerson. This was just the outer edge of the field, and you can see here how green that was. I did pull the combine through this field, and the majority of it came off in mid-September, early September, and the last of it didn't come off until I think early October. We didn't get a frost. I did put it through the combine, or most of it anyways. You can see here, this is before I adjusted the sieve to pop out those pods. So there was some bean, there were a few beans in there. Mine had a few more than some of the other growers did. In the end, putting this green material through the combine, when I went to go and clean things out in the feeder house, or not the feeder house, but in the concaves, it did make a bit of a mess inside there. So with all that green material in there, even though they was able to thrash the pods out. This was again another instance just in that Brunkild and Brunkild area. Same idea, early September, whole fields were grass green and very little pod production. So this is kind of a combination of this mutant sterile plants where the plants has gone under this extreme stress through the growing season and almost shut down. And then when we got those rains in August, things started to regrow. Now this Brunkild area, the beans in that area were quite short. They were extremely dry compared to what we were down in the Red River Valley, southern Red River Valley here. In this particular case here, the grower waited until it froze and then harvested what he could off of it. Again, of course, this is crop insurance in this case here. Not something you'd see every year. It's a very strange occurrence, and it's just something that, and I actually did see it in the dry bean field as well this year. First time in all the years I've been doing pulses that I've seen this kind of scenario. This is not something I'd be concerned about for next year. Unless we get, exact same conditions as what we had, which is probably going to be pretty rare considering we got some pretty good snowfall right now. But just something that was of point of interest for this year. So the last thing I want to touch on a little bit, because I've had a few questions on this as well. Growers are looking at different options when it comes to growing soybeans. Most growers in a majority of our acres that we grow in Manitoba are herbicide tolerant. So whether that be Extend, Enlist, or regular just Roundup Ready soybeans. But there has been a growing interest in growing conventional soybeans or identity preserved soybeans, which is another name for it. They're typically food grade soybeans with clear or yellow hilums. I make this point that they're not tolerant to glyphosate, and I make that point very clear because it's something that if you do look at growing conventional soybeans on your farm, and you have neighbors that have herbicide tolerant varieties, probably a good idea to let them know that these are conventionals, just to try to avoid some of that drought issue, some of that drift issue. So just something to be aware of. IP soybeans, they have specific varieties with certain quality traits, such as for taste and protein and oil content. They've been developed by the companies who are marketing them to foreign buyers, and they're very specific on the varieties that they prefer. Typical markets are Japan, China, Korea, and Malaysia for some of these markets. So we did see a bit of an increase last year in acres. We had just over 30,000 acres. That's up from the 15,000 or 13,000 we had the year before. Over the years, it's always been in that 1% to 2% range. And this year, we're seeing a few growers, looking at that again. Another reason they want to look at these conventional systems is different herbicide packages that you can use for them, and help control or work on some of the resistant weed issues that some growers may have. And in the case of volunteer canola, it gives you a few different options as well. So this is a list from Seed Manitoba from some of the various varieties that we have for conventional beans. They're broken up in your early and mid-season, which are the ones that are more suited for the western side of the province. And you can see here they have some very respectable yields. The varieties have gotten better over the years. If you look at our seed guide, we've been using Prudence as our check for many, many years. That's going to change this year. We're using Liska as a check, just because I think we're moving into the next phase of IP soybeans. But some pretty good numbers, and there are some varieties that do have some good IBC tolerance as well. We also have some of the longer season ones for those of you who are further west, or further east, I should say. And some of these varieties, at the longer end of the scale, are more reserved for kind of the Red River Valley, just because the maturity is quite long, and the yield is high. But with some of these varieties being being much longer than the check for maturity, then you really need to pay attention to those, where you're growing those varieties. If you have questions about conventional beans, probably the best place to start is with the buyers that are buying. The one thing that's different with the conventional beans that we're growing now versus what we started with back in the early 2000s is that now the companies that are contracting conventional beans are also supplying the varieties through their programs for the growers, and they are specific to the buyer's needs, and then they're buying that production back in the fall. So it's a much easier, it's more of a complete marketing chain in that respect. So you can see here, ProGrain, Savita, DNS Commodities, Viterra, those are a few of the companies that are buying conventional beans. So I encourage you to have conversations with them if you are thinking of growing IP soybeans. Find out what their premiums are, find out what their qualifications are for growing, and then some of the things you need to do with growing for them. Some of the big things you need to consider is combine cleanout, cleaning augers, belt conveyors, cleaning bins. You don't want to risk any contamination with Roundup Ready soybeans, because that will negate your contract if it fails the GMO test. If you grow both Roundup Ready and conventional beans, what I would suggest is harvest your conventional beans first. That will help to avoid any contamination. But I think the biggest thing is just combine cleanout is the biggest thing. Just make sure that before you pull into your conventional beans that you do a good cleanout. Even though you may have harvested wheat beforehand, it's probably still a good idea to maybe just make sure there's no beans left in the hopper and do a bit of a blowout before you move them into your conventional beans. And also, what's also important is make sure that the employees that are working for you as well have that knowledge that these are conventional beans. Sometimes what ends up happening is you get somebody goes out in the field and does a strip in their Roundup Ready beans and finds out, oh, it's not they're not ready yet, so let's go over to the next field, and they don't clean their combine out, and then all of a sudden now you have beans in a conventional situation that can be a real problem. So keep those things in mind. So with that being said, I'll wrap it up here and open it up for any questions. I think Lionel had a question here that he texted me last night, and if he wants to ask that, I'll let him ask it, and then I'll address it from there.
Okay, thanks, Dennis. I'm just going to do a check here to see if you can hear me.
I can hear you just fine.
Perfect. Okay, so one of the questions that came in yesterday when the agenda went out is looking at doing a burn off in the spring, and I guess as we're all aware, we're getting short on tight on some of the chemicals, and I guess the question was, is there anything besides glyphosate that they can use in the spring burn off that won't affect his peas? And I guess we might as well talk soybeans as well for growth. So I guess concerned about residues. So is there any products that you might know guys are using that can help them with not having to spray glyphosate as a burn off?
Well, I kind of think you have to maybe look at a little bit broader picture and maybe incorporate some of the soil applied herbicides in this case. You do have some options for peas. Authority Charge and Authority Supreme would be one option to really look at. And again, with growing peas, I think it's a bigger. You have to kind of look at the whole spectrum of how you're controlling your weeds, and start. If you don't have the glyphosate burn off, well then what's your next step, right? Other products, in both soybeans and peas would be the trifurulins and the edges of the world. That can still be done as well. That's another option for you if that'll help spread your risk around a little bit when it comes to spraying later in the season. And I think that's the advantage of some of these soil applied products, is that it'll give you a little bit wider window to spray. Because those weeds don't come as quickly. Volterra and Zigio would be a couple other products that you'll have as well for peas. So those are some of the products that I would kind of really look at, because again, you're looking at long-term control. So even a spring burn off only gets what's coming up, right? It doesn't give you any long-term control. So that's how I probably would approach that question, is just look at the bigger picture in the scenario. So.
Okay, another question came in when you were talking about the cyst nematode, and the question was, how they spread and how fast can it spread? You had showed some RMs there. How fast can this move across the province, or from RM to RM, I guess?
Well, it all depends on the year, and so soybean cyst nematode can move in through soil. It can move in through equipment. So that's why we always recommend if growers are bringing in equipment from other areas that are more prone to soybean cyst nematode, that they do a thorough cleaning before they put it into their fields here. You know, the early cases, when we started looking for soybean cyst nematode, we found it kind of along the river valley, so it can move in through floodwaters as well. But it's kind of one of those things, you know, I think at some point we will all find it in different regions in Manitoba. And in this case here, let me just go back up to that slide there from earlier. And just back a little bit here. There we go. So when you look in here, initially we found it kind of down in this area here. There were fields that were along the river, but we really had to look for it. So they had to dig up soil and they had to really look for that. We also did pull samples from areas that's further north and kind of on the east side of the river that I know have been in soybeans since the early 2000s. We haven't found any yet. So it's not like it's going to spread overnight. And probably what you're going to have is you probably won't know, if you're not looking for it, you probably won't notice those symptoms until it becomes dramatic. In this case here, with what we saw this year, this was a dramatic case. Now, this farmer had, you know, soybeans and dry beans in rotation. We're not sure how it moved in. You know, I know in one of Mario's slides, he always says, he always talks about the geese moving in, and there's a coulee right beside there, and there's always some geese moving in there too. But it could be a combination of things. So I think just keeping an eye on it. It's not something that's going to be in every single field at this point where it's going to affect yield. Even in this field here, you know, they're going to manage that area separately for the next couple of years, or for the next few years, I guess. They're probably going to, you know, maybe possibly put that into a forage or something like that in that headland to try to reduce traffic in that area to spread it. So things like, you know, soil movement, equipment movement through a field, those will all be things that can spread it much quicker. So it's always good to know that you have it, so then you can manage it.
Okay, question for you just regarding fertilizer. Again, producers are concerned about fertilizer prices and maybe timing of getting some fertilizer. Your opinions on using products like, I guess, I'll use Tag Team as an example to, you know, reduce some of the fertilizer requirements, something that producers should be looking at this year?
You know, I think when it comes to fertilizer management on pulse crops, it's kind of an interesting discussion, because really we don't worry about nitrogen to that effect. So that's a given, because in this case we're worrying about the nitrogen levels being too high. As far as phosphate levels, you know, I think because phosphate isn't always available as quickly to the crop, you know, for soybeans, for example, we always recommend banding fertilizer in the fall before and managing it in your other crops. So I think at the end of the day, soybeans are really good scavengers for phosphate. So if you've managed your fields fairly well and your phosphate levels are good, this might be the year to maybe reduce your phosphate application on that particular field. Peas do have a bit better response to phosphate addition, but I'm always a big fan of looking at the fertilizer, because you have to look at long term. So how you manage your long-term fertility on that field is the way to go. So really, I go with what pays the bills, and usually it's more the actual fertilizer. So
one of the other comments was that if the timing isn't right, like for getting the product, can you apply any fertilizers during the growing season for the pulse crops? Is there any advantage to that, or has there been any work on any of that?
I'm not aware of any work, but typically you put your products down in spring would be the best way to manage it. Managing it in crop, yeah, it becomes very difficult because of the sensitivity of the crop and burning of the crop. I know in past, sometimes they've tried, you know, when they've had nodulation failure, some growers have tried to go and use a liquid nitrogen on the crop, on a pulse crop, and in particular soybeans, and burnt them. And you know, when the problem with putting that in, fertilizer in a little bit later, it sometimes doesn't always give you the, you have to do it so late in the season, you have to really make it beneficial. So, going, late in the season, meaning like, I pod fill, and by a lot of times those, by the time pod fill comes around, those crops are pretty big already. So no, I would probably not look at that option as far as being viable. So.
Okay, and inoculation. I guess the question was, again, shortage of fertilizer. Would extra inoculation on the seed be of any benefit?
Well, not really. Really, if you're following label rates, that's usually sufficient. The biggest thing with nodulation is really looking at history. If you, whether it's peas or soybeans, if you have a long-term history of growing those crops on that field, like we'll pick soybeans for example, and you have a long-term history there, the research has shown that with long-term history, growers can actually even cut back to a single inoculation for nitrogen on soybeans. So really adding additional, really, it's not necessarily the number of nodules. They just have to be, they have to be functioning is probably a key. Whereas last year with the dry conditions in some regions, we didn't get good nodulation because it was so dry. High nitrogen level will also affect nodulation. So really, I think just go with your label rate. The only thing I would change is if your nitrogen levels are high, make sure that on soybeans and peas, make sure that you're going that liquid on seed and granular in furrow. I think that's important because you need to spread out your risk a little bit because that granular inoculant is available later in the growing season. So.
Okay, and one other question that just came in was, what about seeding rates this year? Should we be looking at increasing seeding rates or I guess your opinion on seeding rates?
Well, if you look at peas, one of the biggest things, that seeding rate calculator that I pulled up here, I think what you really need to pay attention to is make sure that you know what your germination and germination is, and whether or not, one of the things I used to do with pulse crops is do a soak test just to see how dry that seed is and whether or not the seed coat comes off. So I wouldn't necessarily increase my seeding rate if my germination is good, but if my germination is not good, then you definitely need to be increasing your seeding rate. It might be more of an issue in peas. I've been hearing some discussions about that, this year there might be some lower germs on the seed. So you really need to pay attention to that, and using that seeding rate calculator using that effectively to get your plant stand. That's what you're targeting, is your ultimate plant stand that you'd like to see. So if you have a lower germ seed, you're going to have to put more seed in, but just for the growing season, the plants, to some degree do compensate. In soybeans, they do compensate if you have a lower stand. They branch out a little bit more. Peas don't necessarily do that in that respect. So you want a good stand to start with, and you need the stand to keep these peas upright and interlocked.
Okay, well, Dennis, that's the questions that I've been getting in. So thanks very much for giving us that update on peas and on beans. And I think we addressed a few of the concerns some of the producers have been having. I'd like to thank you for Dennis, but I also like to apologize for some technical difficulties we're having today. I seem to be not able to get on with my slides. So I've got a few closing comments to make, and what we'll do is we'll make sure that the recorded webinar will have my slides on it. But for our next webinar, which will be in 2 weeks' time, we're going to be going back to Kim Brown and Livingston, and there's been a lot of questions regarding herbicides, and probably the topic of shortages will come up as well. And so Kim is going to be back next time on CropTalk, and we're going to look at herbicides. We're going to look at maybe some of the new herbicides, as well as maybe some herbicide strategies for this coming year as we approach a season where we've probably not seen these type of problems before, where we've actually had a problem of maybe finding products. So again, that's our plans for next webinar, which will be in 2 weeks. And I'd like to thank everybody for attending. Apologize for the technical difficulties, but the recorded webinar will have the slides that are required. So with that, Lori, I think we're done for today.